Okie doke.
This meeting is being recorded.
Got it. Okay, very good. I want to thank you all for joining us for today's joint meeting between the Diversity Issues Task Force and the Environmental Committee. On behalf of myself, Mayor Bill McLeod of Hoffman Estates, and Mayor Kevin Burns of Geneva, we thank you for attending and participating in this important conversation. Today's meeting topic is environmental justice, a critical issue affecting the entire region. Environmental justice emerged as the third most important priority in a survey sent out by the Diversity Task Force earlier this year. I'm glad to introduce Geneva's Mayor Kevin Burns, the chairman of the Environmental Committee. You got it, Kevin.
Thank you, Mayor Craig, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you, and we are delighted that so many people have carved out some time this afternoon to discuss this extraordinarily important issue. Now, I've had the pleasure of serving as the mayor of Geneva since 2001, and equally as exciting, I've had the honor of serving as the chair of the Metropolitan Mayors Caucus Environment Committee and Energy Subcommittee for about the last 6 years, working closely with Edith Macra and of course Cheryl Scott, and obviously nearly 280 communities throughout Northern Illinois, focusing on issues that not only advance sustainability within our communities, but address climate action, unique and affordable, easy ways to become more environmentally sustainable. And of course, today's topic is paramount, and that is environmental justice. We are the only organization in Illinois that has every environmental justice community within its membership. So we believe that we are central to not only figuring out, but advancing the goals and the objectives of working with our communities who perhaps disproportionately suffer from environmental injustice. So it's, again, a pleasure to be with you today. We're going to have a great conversation. As all of you know, the Greenest Region Compact and the Climate Action Plan addresses all sorts of issues throughout our region. And some of those issues are perhaps more salient to some communities than others, but we believe that by working together, all those issues can be addressed, can be achieved, and can all be successful. So Mayor Craig, back to you. And again, thank you for the nice introduction.
Unmute there, Mayor. Okay. Katie, are you stepping in at this time?
I am. Thank you, Mayor.
Well, it says, to start off, we'll welcome Katie Friedman from the Metropolitan Mayors Caucus to share some of the updates, and also from the Diversity Issues Task Force. Today, Katie's last Diversity Task Force meeting with the caucus. Today is her last. We hate to see you go, Katie. You've been doing a great job. In September, she'll be leaving for Europe to pursue a master's degree in urban studies in Brussels, Vienna, Copenhagen, and Madrid. And she promises to come back with the knowledge of 5 different languages. Good luck, Katie. You got it.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Can you all see my presentation in presentation mode?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you again for the introduction, Mayor Craig. My name is Katie Friedman. I'm a project manager at the caucus, and I've had the privilege of leading some of our work around diversity, equity, and inclusion in the past year. I'd like to keep this brief so we can get to the main topic of today. My goal is just to give a really quick update on some of our activities over the past few months and provide some context for how environmental justice emerged as a priority within the Diversity Issues Task Force. First, Mayor Craig mentioned this already. I'll be leaving for grad school in the fall, and my last day at the caucus is August 19th. And I just want to say it's been such an incredible opportunity to work at the Mayor's Caucus and get to know so many local leaders doing important work in the region where I grew up. I started at the caucus in the environment program through our Greenest Region Core program, and it just completely changed my outlook on the impact that local and regional collaboration can have on really big issues. So I'm excited to be a part of today's meeting. I know that many Environment Committee members may not be familiar with the work that we've been up to over the past year in the Diversity Issues Task Force. So just as a little bit of background, a lot of our work is centered around looking at equity in the context of day-to-day municipal operations. We know that systemic and structural inequities exist within our communities and our region, and there's a lot of research to tell us so. But when it comes to actually digging into our government policies and practices to start to address some of those issues, it's actually really complicated. So we've been trying to put our heads together over the past year to figure out what it's going to take to actually operationalize the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion, both internally within our organizations and externally within the broader community. One of the requests from our members was to pull together some resources and case studies of local communities that have done work in this area. We've been putting together a kind of interactive web portal to do just that. It's still in the works, but I'll pull up the site now to show how it's coming together. We plan to have the site go live by the end of the month. So let me just pull it up and let me know if you can see it. Are you all seeing a web page?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So this is just a preview, and we may change some of the images, but this is the home page. And as you can see, you can get a little bit of background on equity in the region. Here, we have a case study library that we've been working on to showcase some communities that have been doing important work. I'll go here as an example, and it just kind of summarizes lessons learned from communities that have, for example, started establishing shared definitions and values around equity. And a community profile. So here's an example from the village of Flossmoor. Some background about what they did, some lessons learned in a quote, where you can go to learn more. We know having a contact name and number and email is really important, and then additional resources. We are also, we have a page for our pilot that is in the works, and we will post meeting materials and resources within the next few weeks. So we're really excited that this is coming together. It's taken a lot of work. Let me pull up my slides again and go back. One thing that we are looking for and we want to request of everybody at the meeting, we'd love to kind of populate the site with pictures of our actual local communities. So if you have any great photos of your community, just showing the diversity of people that live in your communities, we would love to showcase them on our website, and please get in touch. I can put my email in the chat after this presentation. In addition to this site, just want to make sure you can still see my screen. You can see the presentation in presentation mode?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So in addition to this site, we've also been working closely with the University of Illinois Chicago Great Cities Institute and Illinois City County Management Association to develop a 6-month pilot to provide training, coaching, and peer support to help municipalities operationalize equity within specific municipal projects. This pilot was built on the successful READY program model that stands for Race, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion that's been implemented at the Forest Preserves of Cook County and the city of Evanston. The idea behind the pilot this year is to test out this model on a regional scale through a diverse cohort of municipalities. The curriculum of the pilot covers topics that are integral to municipal operations, including performance management, communications, human resources, and financial management. And I just want to say congratulations to our first LoRa cohort. We'll be starting in August, actually next week. You can see the names of the participants on this screen, and we really aim to get a diverse set of communities representing a range of population sizes, demographics, and geographic regions. So getting into how environmental justice emerged as a priority topic for the task force, last spring, we sent a survey to all mayors and managers in the region. We received 55 responses, and you can see the spread of communities on the screen. We were really pleased to see representation from all 7 counties in our region, and the respondents represented populations from under 5,000 residents to over 100,000, as well as diverse demographic and socioeconomic profiles. The survey asked respondents to comment on topics related to equity in the region. And these were the results. As you can see, DEI practices in municipal government emerged as the top priority, which is where we've been focusing much of our attention in the past year. However, as I've shown on the screen, environmental justice was the third most popular topic on our survey. And given the fact that our Environment Committee has also been discussing environmental justice, we thought it timely to hold a joint meeting on the topic today. Moving forward, we'd like to propose planning future quarterly meetings on other topics of interest identified in the survey. The task force already knows this, but we have a separate monthly working group in addition to the task force that will continue to dive into topics related to DEI in municipal government. If those in the task force could just put a thumbs up in their screens or comment in the chat box, we'd love your feedback on this idea and whether there are any specific topics you'd like to see at our next meeting. As for the feedback we received on the topic of environmental justice, as you can see, about 70% of our respondents indicated that their community had identified sustainability as a strategic priority, which is great. Actually, many of the communities that responded to our survey are already Greenest Region Compact communities. And for those of you unfamiliar with the Greenest Region Compact, we'll hear a little bit more about that in Edith's presentation later. However, when it came to connecting sustainability and topics related to equity, the overwhelming response we received in the narrative feedback in the survey was, we're interested in this topic, but we don't really know what it looks like or what we should be doing to address it. In fact, some of the key challenges that emerged across all topics in the survey, but especially for environmental justice, were 1, limited staffing, resources, and internal expertise to do the work. 2, not knowing where or how to get started. 3, lacking connections with other municipalities doing the work. 4, and this one's important for today, lacking unified multi-jurisdictional collaboration on shared challenges. And 5, difficulties connecting, building trust, and engaging with a diversity of residents. Some of those issues we'll address directly today. And with that, I'll turn it back to the mayors so we can get into environmental justice.
Oh, and it looks like you're muted, Mayor Burns.
There we go. How's that? Good?
Yep, sounds good.
Life is good. Thanks, everybody. Let me make certain I get my notes here, because I have the pleasure of introducing 3 very talented and dedicated professionals. And the first guy I'm going to introduce, I think what makes him particularly brilliant is that he calls Geneva home, which is nice. This is our friend Alan Walts from the United States Environmental Protection Agency. And Alan, I know exactly where you live. So if you could pay your utility bill, that'd be helpful. Thank you very much. Folks, Alan Walts is a member of the US EPA's District 5, or excuse me, yes, Director of the Tribal and Multimedia Office at the US Environmental Protection Agency. He has served in several capacities at the US EPA over nearly 14-year career. We are most grateful for his enthusiasm for our former Greenest Region Corps program. And as all of you know, the US EPA Region 5 is a generous partner supporting all our work, especially in clean air and clean energy. Our friend Alan will help us understand better what it means by environmental justice broadly, and why it's a pressing issue for all of us specifically. With that, Alan, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Mayor. It's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the chance to work with you in this capacity and to meet and work with all of you. It's a very exciting time in environmental justice, and I'm really happy to know that a group of such important leaders as yourself is putting so much energy into this topic. What I'd like to do today, and this is just a conversation starter, the first thing I want to say is that please consider me and EPA Region 5 an ongoing resource as you do your work. This is a very challenging, complicated topic with lots of nuance. And so I want to start by making that clear. But what I will try to cover today is really just defining environmental justice from EPA's perspective a little bit more, talking a little bit about what we've been doing, and then really how that connects to the work that you're doing, and that notion of the need for a unified multi-jurisdiction collaboration, that rings all my bells. That's exactly what we need, is that whole of government response to really transform our communities and remove all of the impediments to their well-being. So let me start by talking about what does environmental justice mean from an EPA perspective, and keeping in mind, we're a regulatory agency. We do a lot of science, we do a lot of sustainability work, but the main bulk of what we do is permitting and enforcement or overseeing those activities at the state. So that shapes our definition. But it really is very broad in its application. There's two basic principles that go into environmental justice the way that we look at it. One is fair treatment, which means everyone deserves equitable environmental and public health protection. And to make sure that that is happening, it is important that we consider and address disproportionate and cumulative impacts that impede that well-being. Meaning, the other main principle is meaningful involvement. And you all know very well what meaningful involvement means, but from an EPA perspective, it's really about making sure that we are giving everyone who has an interest in the decision outcome, especially the community members who are affected by that, a voice so that there is equitable and impactful access to the decision-making process. When we say meaningful involvement, we're looking for ways to have the community perspective, knowledge, concerns, and vision have a bigger impact on our decisions. So that's what it's about, fair treatment and meaningful involvement. So now let me turn to, so continue with our definitions a little bit. So when we say there's an environmental justice concern, that means for us, there's either a lack of fair treatment, there are disproportionate impacts, cumulative impacts, or we are not doing a good enough job to meaningfully involve people in our decisions. So that's when there is an environmental justice concern. And we hear and welcome those concerns from across our state and across our region. And so that definition that we use is meant to reflect the priority, the priority of the people that we serve.
Yeah.
There's some,
Yeah, it sounds like there's a
the
side
point I want to
conversation.
make
Sorry
being,
about that.
yeah, no worries. The point I want to make here being that the reason we even have an environmental justice program at EPA is because community advocates and their allies mobilized and pointed out that with all the good that we were doing to protect the environment, we were not addressing how those impacts were distributed. We were not addressing fairness. And they also pointed out that we were not doing enough to reflect the fact that people face different kinds of barriers to participate in our process. And if we are serious about community input, we need to work to remove those barriers. So that's been our mission since 1994. Now it's taking on a whole new level of significance with a whole new level of support for this work. And we're very fortunate for this next phase to have a tool called EJ Screen that I think many of you might be familiar with. I'll ask Cheryl to throw up some slides in a second that will allow me to talk about a little bit more detail, but I want to first give you the sort of the concept behind it that will allow you to approach it in any particular situation. What EJ Screen basically does is it takes the idea of disproportionate impacts and it breaks it down so that we can ask for any area in the country, is there a significant potential of disproportionate impacts in this community compared to the state, compared to the region, or compared to the nation? So it's a screening tool, as the name indicates, to help us find places where we need to look at a further investment to fulfill environmental justice principles, especially around fair treatment. It helps tell us where we need to do meaningful involvement, but within it is the idea of fair treatment, fair and square, because it defines disproportionate impacts in terms of pollution. So there's all these indicators in there about air, land, water, the potential for a pollution burden in a specific place, right? And then the other important piece is population vulnerability. The reason that matters is because different levels of pollution, just from a scientific standpoint, affects populations differently depending on what burdens those populations already experience, the cumulative impacts that they face, and the social determinants of health. All of the other factors that determine community well-being also determine their vulnerability to pollution. So since we do not have the same kinds of national data sets for population vulnerability that we do for these different sets of pollution data, we use race and class as our proxies for population vulnerability. And that reflects the sad reality that we are all grappling with here in order to transform it, that the quality of life in terms of the environment and public health, environmental public health protection is influenced by where people live, and that is strongly correlated with race and also strongly correlated with income. So we can use those two factors to help us very accurately screen for places where we might want to ask, do we see a combination of a high pollution burden and high population vulnerability that together tell us there is a potential for an environmental justice concern that we should look into and understand and unpack that. If there's work that needs to be done, we should do it. If we just need to understand the community better, we should do that. So that's what EJ Screen is for. And Cheryl, I'm thinking at this point you could put up those nice set of slides that you created, and that'll help make this a little bit more real and tangible for folks who haven't had a chance to go and play with EJ Screen. I will highly encourage all of you to go just like look up EPA EJ Screen. It's very user friendly. For you folks who have GIS people on your staff, you can download all of this data and use it as layers in your own tools. It's meant to be very flexible in that sense. So what we have in front of us now is an overview of the Chicagoland area, looking at the Environmental Justice Index for particulate matter 2.5. This is very fine particulate matter that's usually a byproduct of combustion and can have a very significant impact on people's respiratory and cardiovascular health. It's also important because, as with lead, there's really no ultimately safe level of particulate matter. There's no bright line. So it's very similar to cancer risks and lead risk in that way. And it's therefore important to compare relative levels, not just absolute levels. So here you can see a map with different colors. Each of these colored kind of block areas is at a block group resolution. We do have a very fine level of resolution here. And if it's yellow, orange, or red, that kind of puts it in, a zone where there is a significant enough potential for environmental justice concerns related to that indicator that we want some color coding on the map so folks can think about maybe looking a little bit more closely in those areas. And you can see the distribution, it speaks for itself. What I want to highlight here and I'll do through the rest of the slides is that there are 3 different kinds of indicators. It's also important to understand that. So we're not thinking too much of this as a risk assessment tool, that we are really thinking of it as a place to tell us where to go, where to collaborate, and where to create change and increase our understanding. Some of the indicators try to estimate risk or hazard, okay? Some of the indicators try to estimate potential exposure, and some are just telling you the quantity of a type of facility in a certain place, and the proximity of those facilities is in itself something worth knowing, not because it tells you directly that those facilities are creating a certain risk, but because it's important for that type of facility to look at whether it might be creating that risk. So hopefully that makes sense. And it really is just, it's part of why we have 12 different EJ indexes instead of making everyone's life easier and all rolling them up into one. So you can just say, is this place in or out? It's because they use different ways of estimating the potential for harm to those populations. Hazardous waste proximity is a great example of a proximity measure where, yes, it matters to know how many hazardous waste treatment disposal facilities are in your vicinity, in your neighborhood, but it does not necessarily mean that any of those facilities are creating a certain risk. What it does mean, and this is how EPA uses it, is that in those places that show up at these higher percentiles for hazardous waste proximity, that tells us those facilities in combination with population vulnerability could create real concern, and we need to pay especially close attention to whether or not those facilities are in compliance. So it helps guide EPA in how we apply our program tools to protect the people that we serve in all of your jurisdictions and communities. It's also a tool that you can use, pulling in different layers. What the layers that we've touched on here that are tied to our ability to identify areas of EJ concern barely scratch the surface. There's a lot more data in here, as you can kind of just see scanning the legend on the left, including for the first time as of last February, more data on health to help identify health disparities. So it's a very rich set of information. We're here as EPA to continue to collaborate with you on it as your GIS folks, think about exploring this and whether it might help you define and articulate your own environmental justice goals in your municipalities as well. So that is how the tool is set up. Now, I started talking a little bit about how EPA applies this, but what I want to do is step back now and talk about the three kinds of investments that EPA is making now. So under goal 2 of our strategic plan, which takes us through FY26, we've got the second goal of our entire agency's plan is advance environmental justice and equity. That is completely unprecedented. Also completely unprecedented is the $100 million that we've already put into building our environmental justice program. About 50 million of that went to increase air monitoring resources for states and local governments to use to get a better handle on what's going on the ground. Another chunk of that went to us building up our environmental justice program. So I will be hiring quite soon to build a larger environmental justice program that will be better able to carry out these objectives. And the first objective is to carry out place-based, community-focused work. We don't do that alone, of course. We do that with allies and partners and stakeholders like yourselves, but focusing our attention on the places that are most overburdened is the best way to move the dial and create better outcomes. If our goal is to address disproportionate impacts, we need to focus our attention and resources on the places that are disproportionately impacted and put resources in there until we move the dial and we see better outcomes. And that includes not just better outcomes in terms of lower pollution, but better outcomes in terms of what you all are working on in sustainability and the resilience and overall well-being of that community. That's what community-based work can really get us to. It can help us bring our regulatory tools to the table, but beyond that, leverage investments that will transform the fundamental well-being of communities. So you're not just removing impediments, you're making those fundamental investments that you're always looking to make in your people. The second major focus area for us is to build strong collaborative relationships with governmental partners. And that's why I was so happy to hear that you identified a need for unified multi-jurisdictional collaboration. 100%, and EPA is there to learn how to collaborate with you in ways that we may never have done before. We have written into our executive orders that are our basic federal policy to take whole of government approaches. And we are investing in every way that we can. As I'm hiring up into my program, I'm looking for people who are great collaborators and will be really great partners to state and local government as we work together in communities. And that is already a core part of our ethos, is how do we do that? The third major piece is putting our own house in order. We've had, I started at EPA in 1996. By that time, we'd already had 2 years of an executive order that told us to make environmental justice a top priority. And we were still trying to figure it out, but we've made a lot of progress. We've integrated environmental justice in a lot of ways. We've built tools like EJ Screen, but our third objective is to take it to the next level and really make sure that we've integrated equity and environmental justice into our thinking for all of our program work. So it's a guiding principle for everything that we do. And that we're always, for example, considering whether or not a permit that a state might be issuing under a delegated program might create disproportionate impacts on a community, taking that much more seriously and analyzing that much more closely than we ever have before. So with all of those investments in place, I don't think we could be at a better time to be coming together to have these shared priorities. And I think what we have really before us now is a call to action that really welcomes us to walk the talk on what that multi-jurisdictional collaboration looks like, to work together to find the places where we want to make those shared investments, to exemplify, just as you are in the DEI space, to pilot projects and to exemplify what real equity looks like on the ground when you're bringing environmental and public health perspectives to the table and making those investments. And then from an EPA perspective, we're all about how do we bring in other federal agencies? How do we bridge the sometimes unreasonably wide gap between environmental and public health agencies and teach ourselves how to work together and bridge our different cultures and tools so that we're putting them together for the good of the people that we all serve. So that's what EPA is about. That's the future that we're hoping for. And I'm really excited to hear your thoughts, your questions, and have this be the start of a long-term partnership around this work. So I'll stop there.
Mr. Walts, thank you very, very much. I'm just going to add two quick comments. First, the takeaway I heard is the key word is leverage. And obviously you defined that quite well,
Yep.
so thank you. My question is, do you have a running tab of how many folks have actually checked out the EJ screen? Just out of curiosity.
Mayor, that's a great question. I'm sure somebody in headquarters does. I'm going to get my hands on it because I know it started like this, but it really has taken off just based on anecdotal.
Yeah,
but I'll get that. That's a good data point.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's I don't think fun's the word, but it's certainly informative just to spend time on there. And I'm just curious how many hits we've had. So that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to chime in before we continue on? Okay. I don't know, Edith or Cheryl, you monitoring the chat? Can we continue or?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay.
I just put a comment in the chat, Ellen,
Okay.
and only to follow up on a short conversation you and I had. If we're further interested in exploring EJ screen, you did say there's opportunities for anyone who's interested to get training, correct?
That is correct. We are always happy to provide technical assistance on that. I just dropped my email address in the chat. You can reach out to me and I'll share it with my team. And also start by taking a look at the website. There's a lot of good kind of basic stuff on there, and that way we can use our time with you to dig into more, maybe situation-specific topics and really provide you rich technical assistance. But we're happy to meet you wherever you are and walk with you on that journey, that learning journey.
That's great.
Thank you.
And since you and I both live in Geneva, Ellen, we can just do it anytime we want to. So what the heck?
That's right, Mayor.
Folks, our next speaker is none other than Dr. Ashish Sharma. Now, all of you, I think, know this gentleman. He's going to talk about the NASA eJust program. Dr. Sharma is with the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, Department of Atmospheric Sciences. Dr. Sharma is the Illinois Research Climatologist with Illinois State Water Survey and Adjunct Assistant Professor, Department of Atmospheric Sciences at U of I. Dr. Sharma is a contributor, a significant contributor to our climate action plan for the Chicago region, and has always been and likely will always be an outstanding ally for our work to achieve environmental justice. And here's what's really cool. And I know you're going to touch on this, Dr. Sharma, but Dr. Sharma just won a grant award from NASA to pioneer environmental justice solutions for our region. Dr. Sharma, congratulations. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor Burns. So I'll share my screen now.
Sure.
I hope you can see my screen.
Yep, looks good.
Yes.
Awesome, thank you. So thanks for the opportunity. And I think this is a good audience to just talk about the project that we won in collaboration with Metropolitan Mayors Caucus. And we took some time to think about the title for the project. And I believe this title is quite just. We call it eJust, Environmental Justice Using Urban Scalable Toolkit. And I'm going to give you a little bit overview. We are going to start this project sometime this month. So it's a 2-year project, but I'm going to talk to you about what this project is about. And hopefully in near future, maybe in future meetings, I'm going to give you updates of what we have achieved so far and take input from you all. So this is kind of a brief schematic of what the project is about. The blocks which are in the yellow is the things that we have done collectively with the Mayors Caucus, and the blue blocks are the things which are input to a project. For example, we are going to use a lot of meteorological sensor data set on air quality and meteorology in our project. And of course, this is an NASA-funded, federally funded project. We are going to use their remote sense data sets and climate model data sets that they provide. At the same time, we at in-house do a lot of high resolution urban climate modeling. So we are going to use that. And the city of Chicago, the Chicago region broadly, and many organizations also capture a lot of public data sets related to socioeconomic, health, crime, tree canopy, and various other sources of data sets. So we're going to massage all these data sets. And as you can imagine, this data set is going to be at varying resolutions, both spatially and temporally. A few of them might be at site specific, and at the same time, we would conduct surveys and other aspects of the research to create a data companion, and then use that to create our toolkit. So we are going to engage with you all, with communities and practitioners, and basically talk about three or four things: heat, air quality, health, and crime. And crime is a little bit unique in Chicago as well. And we have been doing some interesting work looking at impacts of crime and climate change. So I think giving that as that flavor coming would be really interesting for the project. I'm going to, and of course, the themes for this project integrate multiple areas related to climate hazards, extreme heats, public health, and air quality that I just talked about. In addition, we have green space, urban development questions, connections with utilities, and how utilities are impacted with climate change as well as crime. So I'm going to run you down the objectives of this project. There are 4 key objectives. First is you're going to develop this architecture with the capability for scale and portability. So by scale, we want that once a toolkit like this is created, it should be scaled beyond Chicago metro areas to, say, the state of Illinois and beyond. And by portability, I mean that the toolkit can be portable to other urban areas so that they can use the similar framework. And this is a drawback that we have seen with many existing tools that are already present. And that's something we want to, on a science part, we want to improve and make it user-friendly in an open science way to a lot of community globally. I think this is very technical, so I'll skip this, but all the data analytics will go behind the scenes. There will be nothing for the user to see that and all the dirty work, but we'd like to, at the front end, we like to create a visualization platform, which would be very user-friendly. That's what our vision is, where it would create a dashboard where people can toggle things and look at the relationships, maybe give users some capability to look at, assess the relationship between multiple variables, so that they can understand, okay, what's the relationship of a variable that they think on some other variables, for example. At the same time, we would be allowing the users to develop static figures and high resolution figures so that they can use based on playing around with the data themselves, so that they can use them and infer results. Secondly, we would like to co-identify extreme heat and air quality threats to health, equity, and crime. So here we'll come back to you and the communities together, their inputs, and this will be by citizen engagement. We will likely do with participatory sessions and citizen commissions and meetings like this. We'd create a heat vulnerability index, the mapping mechanism, and we'd like to not only just create a static heat vulnerability map that we see historically, but maybe have some dynamic sense in that, like how does it vary between day and night? How does it vary between seasons and those kind of concepts? And of course, we'll do crime mapping as well and understand the relationship between different variables. Third, this is a little bit on a technical side, but this is interesting just to inform you that this is not just a visualization platform that just produces data layers, but at the back end, we are going to understand, okay, how these layers interact with each other. So we learned this concept last year, along with working with Metropolitan Mayors Caucus from our partner institutions in Europe and abroad. Concepts like thermal maps, climatopes concepts. So we're going to put those concepts in our understanding and try to develop a regional climate atlas with the vast amount of data that we have in this region and the work that we do on creating high resolution climate model outputs. Lastly, the goal eventually is to empower communities, you all, with evidence-based measures, because we all know, okay, what's the impacts of heat, air quality, and crime, but providing evidence-based measure is the key here, so that we can improve the heat equity and reduce crime. So the critical aspect would be, how can we co-produce knowledge? And we don't want it to be a one-way traffic where we create something and then deliver it to public. We want it to be really co-production of knowledge, so that we can empower underserved and EJ communities. And how can we integrate these into municipal planning and operations, and working with you all. And that's where your group would be really helpful in those discussions. And we have had discussions like that in the past. So I think this is quite timely with whatever is happening at the federal level, with the new Climate Act being passed at the Senate and hopefully in the House. So, and the investments going at different levels, from Department of Energy, NASA, from NSF, from renewed interest at different levels of governance too. So I think a tool like this would be really, really great. We participated with the caucus on the climate action plan for the region. And I think this work is also kind of an output or an outcome you can think of this project, of how can we use that as a framework, so that we can do some science behind it, so that we can look at how can we adopt short-term health and equity strategies. At the same time, we would like to understand how can we prepare for long-term solutions. So short-term solutions can be, how can we, without any extra investments, how can we just tune things or leverage things so that we can adopt them? But in the long term, we can have a vision, or might require resources. So how can we work along those lines? At the end, I'd like to say this project will serve a lot of folks, including the research community from interdisciplinary sciences, policymakers and their staff, community like yours, community members, as well as we would like to also open it for developers, so that they can augment, utilize, and build on this technological framework that we are going to design by this EGIS framework. So I'd like to conclude that, and I'd like to thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about it and give you a little bit teaser of what we plan to do in the next 2 years. And hopefully I'll be able to interact much more with you all. We did a small press release, here's a link for that. And please have a look at that. And yeah.
Dr. Sharma, thank you very much. First and foremost, it is a privilege working alongside you. What Dr. Sharma did not share with all of us, and I'm giving you some insight and perhaps a sneak peek, but in 2 years after this program is complete to the grant funding received, Dr. Sharma has the opportunity to travel to space, courtesy of NASA, and he's going to invite 10 people on this call. So if you're interested, please put a thumbs up on the chat. And is that right, Dr. Sharma?
I hope so, but I have a PhD in aerospace engineering, and that's why I did PhD in aerospace engineering with a vision, or thinking, okay, I might go to space someday or work on space propulsion or those kind of things. But
well, we're proud of you. Keep up the great work.
Thank you.
Our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, none other than our friend and colleague, Edith Macra. Edith Macra, as we all know, is the Director of Environmental Initiatives and the author of the Greenest Region Compact and co-author of our Climate Action Plan for the Chicago region. These two documents and the momentum they have created, no doubt, gives us a great foundation for further work on environmental justice. Edith will walk us through some observations about emerging environmental justice opportunities in the new Climate and Equitable Jobs Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill. Ladies and gentlemen, Edith Macra.
Thank you so much, Mayor Burns. It's really neat to be introduced as a speaker because I don't get to do that in the Environment Committee meetings. So it's working behind the scenes. So thank you to the Diversity Issues Task Force for joining us and having us here. I am going to move through some slides quickly because I am quite sure many of you know the Greenest Region Compact reasonably well. So let's. Am I sharing appropriately? Are you seeing the slides?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So I just wanted to talk about the Greenest Region Compact and introduce what we already know or what we've already stated and articulated and determined about environmental justice as a regional collaborative, and then these regional objectives that we have. So the two documents that I wanted to go over, as Mayor Burns said, is the Greenest Region Compact. And the compact is really an articulation of goals. I wanted to go over some slides about how it was all put together, but know that we did a lot of research studying sustainability documents and plans that were already created by municipalities, and some regional and national ones in which we derived our goals and objectives. And so what we did in looking at 49 sustainability plans that we studied to create these high-level categories for the Greenest Region Compact. And there are 49 goals in these 10 categories. To dive in a little bit, the sustainable communities category is where we see the equity goals, and it's a little probably generous to say that we actually address environmental justice in the Greenest Region Compact, but we do talk about, and here's all the sustainable communities goals. It's a bit of a catch-all. I call it the people section of the Greenest Region Compact, because it's not just about, you know, water or waste or any infrastructure, but this is where a lot of all the people stuff lives. And I popped out in purple the ones that are most relevant to environmental justice. And the goal is foster a culture of health, safety, and wellness, sustain community principles that are welcoming and inclusive and equitable, and ensure policies and codes support sustainability. And I left the other ones there for you to scan as you have time. And if you haven't joined or looked at the Greenest Region Compact, we'll share that link for you so you can get caught up with it. Greenest Region Compact, so just understand that those high-level goals there have been now formally adopted by communities throughout the region. And there are tools to enliven those goals and that compact. I say the Greenest Region Compact exists in three parts. First is the compact, and we now have 138 municipalities, 4 counties, and all 10 COGs in the region who have formally supported the goals of the Greenest Region Compact, including the ones that I just showed related to sustainable communities and equity. That's the political statement of the GRC. The Greenest Region Compact framework is a tool for creating municipal sustainability plans and guiding municipal action from those goals. And I'll show you a snapshot of that on the next slide. And then the last piece of the Greenest Region Compact is collaboration to achieve the GRC goals. So here's a snapshot of the Greenest Region Compact framework, and it's a really plain spreadsheet that's highly functional, and it's very useful to communities. And here's how it works. So this is a multi-39-page document or so, but that first goal there that I just highlighted is what everybody agreed to. So remember, we have 142 local governments who have supported this goal to foster a culture of health, safety, and wellness. The GRC framework tool then can be used to shop for and study this list of possible strategies and objectives to then create your own plan. So it's not designed or meant that every community is going to do all of these things, but that you can use these tools, those columns on the right, to evaluate, self-assess where you're at, and then to set your own plans tailor it for your community within the capacity that you have and the priorities that you have in your community. I wanted to highlight the third objective. Usually I get a chance to talk more about our third objectives and collaborative, our third part of the compact and collaboration, but I wanted particularly to highlight the Greenest Region Core, which Mayor Burns mentioned that the US EPA had been supportive of. This was our AmeriCorps program. We ran it for 3 years and the program has ended now. But we have 30 AmeriCorps volunteers serving in communities and providing capacity to accelerate that host municipalities' progress towards Greenest Region Compact goals. And very proudly, we targeted and served 7 environmental justice communities or host organizations in the Chicago region. Now, moving on to the climate action plan for the region, and thank you, Ashish, for giving it a plug as well. This plan was just finished about a year ago, and it has been, as Ashish also mentioned, this was part of an international effort. So if you didn't know much about the plan, it's only the 3rd regional climate action plan in the US, and it's the first for the Chicago region. The climate action plan very much focuses on equity, but it's built on 3 major components: climate mitigation or reducing greenhouse gas emissions, climate adaptation, preparing for a climate change that is already occurring and is inevitable, and doing both of those in an equitable fashion. So whereas the Greenest Region Compact touched on environmental justice and equity, the Climate Action Plan is really grounded in equity. We set two very high-level goals, one for climate adaptation, which has the word equitable in it, persistent climate equitable adaptation, and then the greenhouse gas goal. Spend much more time on this in another presentation, and I talk about it a fair amount, but it's we've got more details to it. The mitigation side, I wanted to point out, this is one particular mitigation objective. There are 8 of them. And then you'll see in the strategies column, this looks a lot like the Greenest Region Compact framework by design. But you'll notice that for every mitigation strategy, we have its relationship to equity, whether how to achieve equity by taking that mitigation action. So again, anchored in equity, but where we really see equity and environmental justice addressed is in the adaptation objectives. And there are 2 objectives there that really target community engagement and in equity and inclusion into climate adaptation efforts. And the rest of them, it's all integrated, but we absolutely call out equity and inclusion in the objectives. And I wanted to wrap up by saying, so we have these regional collaboratives and we have the strong support for the Climate Action Plan and the Greenest Region Compact. I didn't say it, but right now we have 34 communities that have formally endorsed the goals of the Climate Action Plan. So with this foundation and with this strong support and articulation of environmental justice related objectives, what is our opportunity for moving forward? Because now, as Alan gave some great insight into what the US EPA is doing, but there's a lot of movement and a lot of momentum that we could connect with by asserting our collaboration and agreement on environmental justice objectives. And I just wanted to, again, the diversity folks may not be as aware of this, the Environment Committee folks are probably tired of hearing about CEJA and the Illinois Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. This is considered a landmark piece of legislation, it's been called the most equitable climate bill in the nation, extremely progressive piece of legislation. And just so you know what our opportunities are and what catching up we have to do, the term environmental justice community was used 94 times in this 900-page document. And what's a little, I guess, something to observe and to pay attention to is the definition. This is a legal definition in Illinois law that is allowing the Illinois Power Agency to define environmental justice community. And one of the points that I wanted to make is just about defining so that environmental justice communities know about these definitions and the opportunity to collaborate so they don't get left out. The CEJA invests $580 million a year in renewable energy, some $115 million a year in environmental justice communities for job training. And importantly, many provisions are available only to environmental justice communities, or there's higher provisions for those representatives from environmental justice communities. So in order to connect up to these resources, I want, just think about how we're defined and how we're identified and who's advocating to make sure that some of these resources come to our communities. And then at a very, very high level, similarly in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, I didn't even get a chance to update here because we're still waiting for the, what's the new climate bill called? Help me here. Inflation Reduction Act. Thank you.
Exactly.
Right. Which also just an incredible commitment to restoring equity. The bipartisan infrastructure bill is called the largest investment in environmental justice in history. And the Justice 40 initiative is an executive order. It's an overlay on all of the investments coming from the federal government that is aiming to direct 40% of all the overall benefits of federal investments to flow to disadvantaged communities that are marginalized, underserved, and overburdened by pollution. So again, in conclusion, just wanted to say we've got this foundation, we've said some things about environmental justice, and there's enormous opportunities for communities in our region. Thank you.
Thank you, Edith. Thank you very much. Continuing on, folks, we're going to discuss the Climate Health Initiative. We have a very special guest with us today from the University of Illinois Chicago School of Public Health, our friend Elena Grossman. Elena Grossman is also a contributor to our climate action plan for the Chicago region. She's been a friend of ours for years and years and years. She is a research specialist with the University of Illinois in the School of Public Health. She just won a grant to support both environmental justice communities in our region and graduate students to support community action on climate change and public health. The grant, of course, is from our friends at the United States Environmental Protection Agency. So, of course, we again thank our friends at the US EPA. Elena, the floor is yours. You have 2 hours to make your presentation.
All right. Thank you so much. I'll take all 2 hours.
Excellent.
Let me just pull up my slides.
It's good to see you again. Thank you for being with us.
It's good to see you too. Thank you for inviting me. Okay, so as the mayor said, I will be talking about the Climate and Health Institute at the UIC School of Public Health. But I'm first going to connect environmental justice, climate change, and health. So we're going to jump right into the impacts of climate change on human health. This is a fun little slide that actually the CDC Climate and Health Program produced. And it just shows how climate change is leading to a number of environmental conditions. And these environmental conditions have a plethora of impacts on our health. Some of the health impacts that you see in this slide are not necessarily going to impact us here in Illinois or even us here in the United States. But a number of them will. You can see, for example, more extreme heat will lead to an increased risk of heat-related illness. Worsening air quality exacerbates asthma and other respiratory health conditions. Changes in vector ecology leads to an increased risk for all the diseases that ticks and mosquitoes spread. More severe weather and extreme precipitation leads to a number of public health impacts, including respiratory health from mold, injuries and deaths from both preparing for the flood, during the flood, and cleaning up after the flood. And the mental health impacts. That's actually, mental health impacts is impact that we often pull out as its own impact, as it has become highlighted more, but it was kind of hidden and still can be hidden. So there are just a number of mental health, of health impacts that climate change is causing. And climate change is having a disproportionate impact on environmental justice communities. So this is an infographic from the National Climate Assessment, and it's just showing how there are certain communities, certain populations that are more susceptible to the public health impacts from climate change. Climate change exacerbates existing problems, right? It stresses existing stressors. And so when you have already existing challenges, existing public health challenges within certain communities, within certain populations, then climate change will just make it worse. So as it relates to climate change, a really big impact on our health is actually where you live. And there have been a number of studies that have found that your zip code is actually a better predictor of health than your genetic code. And there are some indices and kind of projects that have illustrated that. And so one is at the Virginia Commonwealth University, and they have a center on society and health. And they looked at life expectancy based on different public transportation, different public transportation throughout the United States. And so they did Chicago. So this is according to the L, the colors are actually the same as the colors of the L, the red line, the green line, the orange line. And you can see in the loop, the average life expectancy is 85 years, where if we look at Washington Park in south side of Chicago is 69 years. So that's a 16-year difference that's only separated by about 8 miles. That's a huge difference. And then, you know, we're going to go into thinking about studies. This is one of them, nitrogen dioxide exposure, which is produced from burning fossil fuels. And you're looking at maps of the United States. On the top, it's by region, and then it goes to state as it goes down, county, and then urban areas. And the red color indicates that communities of color are exposed to more pollution than white communities. And then the blue color indicates the reverse, that white communities are exposed to more nitrogen dioxide than communities of color. The darker the red, the larger the discrepancy. And then they looked at the year 2000 and then 10 years later. And while, you know, there isn't a terrible difference, maybe it decreased, the disparity decreased slightly, you can see that communities of color are disproportionately exposed to nitrogen dioxide. This was actually a study done by NASA and the US Geological Survey, and they were looking at communities of color, income and surface temperature. And you can see that, so the darker the red, the hotter the census tract, and then the lighter the green, the lower income. And they found that hotter areas tend to be the poorest areas and tend to be communities of color. So this is another study looking at tree canopy, percentage of tree canopy and impervious pavement in 4 cities in California. Now, while this is in California, it's really reflective of other communities of color, other low-income communities throughout the United States. So the yellow bar graph shows percent of impervious pavement. The red shows percentage of tree canopy. So the higher, the taller the red bar graph, the better, right? It's a higher percentage of tree canopy. The taller the impervious pavement, the worse, right? That's more impervious pavement. And then they looked at within each city different income brackets. And so you can see in every city, the lower income bracket often has lower tree canopy and higher impervious pavement. And then they did the same for looking at communities of color. And you see that same relationship. And then another way of looking at this is through flooding, right? And so this is actually a study that the Center for Neighborhood Technology did looking at urban flooding. And this is they looked at Cook County. So the map that you're looking at is by zip code. The color of the zip code represents the median household income. So the lighter the yellow, the lower the median income. And then the red highlighted zip codes represent the zip codes that had the highest number, the highest insurance claims for floods. And so you can see the majority of those red highlighted zip codes are the lowest median income households. So now if we look at more of a larger national scale, so the US EPA produced a report on climate change and social vulnerabilities. And it's a very in-depth report. I'm sharing kind of the overall graph that they produced, and it's the likelihood that those in socially vulnerable populations are living in areas that have the highest projected impact. So these are projections looking into the future based on whether it's a 2 degrees Celsius increase or 4 degrees Celsius increase. And so you can see in these 2 different groups, low income and minority, the majority, almost all of the negative environmental and public health impacts are happening at a higher rate for low income communities and for minority populations. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this. Alan did a great job at describing the EPA's EJ screen. Illinois Power Agency also has a way to identify environmental justice communities here in Illinois. And they use the EPA EJ screen as well as a methodological framework that was actually established through CEJA. So they're just really great resources that are really easy to use that can help you identify EJ communities in Illinois and the United States. And, you know, I used those tools to identify partner municipalities for the Climate and Health Institute, which I'm going to talk about in the next slide. But the 4 municipalities are Chicago Heights, Waukegan, Aurora, and Hanover Park. And before I jump into talking about the Climate and Health Institute, while, you know, I talked about the disproportionate impact of the disproportionate impact of pollution and environmental changes from climate change on EJ communities, but it's also important to think about, you know, baseline health indicators without climate change even exacerbating them. Now, getting baseline health indicators at the municipality level is a challenge because here in Illinois, our public health system is set up at the county level. So you really have to maybe pester your health department to try to, you know, to get data at the municipal level. The data that I was able to access, most of these are from, so hospitals are required to do community health assessments every 5 years. And sometimes you're able to get zip code or municipal level data. So I'm just going to kind of pull out some of the information that I found. So for Chicago Heights, it's considered a medically underserved area with, you know, a health professional shortage. In Waukegan, they have the 2nd highest rate for mental health hospitalizations in Lake County. Aurora has a relatively higher asthma prevalence compared to the state. They also have the last 2 bullet points were self-identified data. So people reported that they did not have good physical health days or mental health days for 14 days, and that's higher than related to Illinois. And in Hanover Park, they have a relatively high uninsured population. So understanding where your municipality is at the baseline level for health indicators is really important in thinking about climate change, because climate change will just stress those existing stressors. So moving on to the Climate and Health Institute. As the mayor said, this is supported by the US EPA. It's an environmental education grant. And we will be starting it this fall. It's a partnership between the UIC School of Public Health students, the Metropolitan Mayors Caucus, and these 4 municipalities that I just discussed: Waukegan, Aurora, Chicago Heights, and Hanover Park. So quick description, it's a 2-year project. Hopefully the school will love it and will adopt it and support it. But in year 1, we'll be selecting 10 students, 5 undergraduate and 5 graduate students. The University of Illinois Chicago has a public health undergraduate program. So there will be 10 public health students. We really are hoping to have up to 30 community members from the 4 communities, because community members really contribute knowledge, experience about their municipality to the classroom and for students. And I think it could also just be a reciprocal learning and sharing experience. Through the academic year, we will be sharing 8 trainings on climate change and health, both from an academic perspective as well as a practical. So each municipality will deliver 1 training based on their expertise. That might be, for example, if they developed an active transportation project where they worked on more bike lanes, for example, or more trail space. You know, what was that process like at the municipal level? What do you do to go through it? The academic side will provide, you know, the research and information on climate change and health and equity. There's a huge environmental justice component. The 4 municipalities are EJ communities, and the whole purpose is to prepare public health students to be able to address climate change, health, and equity. At the end of the first year, an undergraduate and graduate student will be matched to then work for one of the 4 municipalities or the Metropolitan Mayors Caucus. And they will develop a project in partnership with the municipality. So what will the municipality need? What do they need? What is feasible for the municipality? What's the best way to reach community members in their municipality? And the project will have an environmental education component. It doesn't not have to be the only thing. So it could be developing, I'm kind of jumping into year 2 now. So the second year, the 5 pairs of students will work for the municipality or the Metropolitan Mayors Caucus. The first half of that year will be developing the project. So I gave some examples of what those projects might be. It could be a map. And then using that map to produce educational information. It could be organizing an educational event. It could be developing an outreach plan to the most vulnerable community members during an extreme weather event. It could be something else, right, that both the students and the municipalities come up with. But there's definitely an educational component. And the second half of that year will be disseminating it to community members. And we're hoping that, if there are community members who are participating in the trainings, that they will help disseminate the information. They'll help inform how to disseminate the information. And then, there'll be sharing of it at the end within the Climate Health Institute cohort. But again, the 2 main objectives are to prepare public health professionals to be able to address climate change, health, and equity, and then also to increase knowledge and awareness about climate change, health, and equity to public health students, to municipal leaders, and to community members. And so that's what I have right now. Obviously, there's more to come. So when we have more information, we're hoping to, we will definitely be happy to share what we have with all of you. And that's what I got.
Facility office, this is Carrie.
Thank you, Elena, very much. And my thanks to all our
Good,
speakers.
how are you?
Alan, Ashish.
Mayor Burns, I think you went on mute here.
My apologies. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Ashish. Thank you, Edith, and thank you, Elena. So please note that we went with people whose names begin with A and E. Next week, we will begin with B's and C's. So with that, I turn it over to the estimable mayor of Hanover Park, Rodney Craig. All yours.
Well, it looks like we're running a little long. So I would like to, we're learning a lot about environmental justice, and Katie or Kyle, if you can capture some of those notes that popped up for environmental justice, and it was really good information. And I was trying to track it all as we go along, and probably losing my mind. But if you can get us in the minutes when you share that, so we can capture that. And but the presenters were doing an outstanding job. Mayor Burns, you're right on. Yeah, excellent work, and very reflective of the positive work of the Mayor's Caucus, and the goodwill that we continually get from the caucus. So with that, I think, Katie, you want to kind of, I don't know, where you want to go from here? I know we're getting late in the hour, and we were going to break off in discussion groups, but I think we're going to dispense with that and try to address some of the things as a whole. So Katie, you have it. Bail me out on this one.
Exactly, Mayor. I think we're running a little over on time. So rather than go into breakout rooms, I'll just pull up the discussion questions on the screen. We can kind of talk as a group. So I will pull that up right now.
And Katie, as you do that, I want to stress something I wanted to stress at the end of the meeting, but I'll do it now to get everyone cogitating about this. At the conclusion of this meeting today, or as you think about it, we want to hear from you. What is it the Metropolitan Mayors Caucus can do, should do, must do regarding environmental justice? We want you to tell us. We are the most powerful group in the state of Illinois with all environmental justice communities represented, but we need your direction. We do not have all the answers, but we believe that this cohort gathered today and others do. So please be direct, be frank. There's no soft stepping any of this stuff. Just let us know. Sorry, Katie.
Not at all. So I've pulled up some questions on the screen, and as Mayor Burns just said, we would love to hear from you. First and foremost, why are you here today? Why do you care about environmental justice?
Katie, we're just looking for chat answers at this point, just with
Sure.
Right.
48 people in the virtual room. I think it'd be great if people just gave us their thoughts in the chat.
Yeah, that would be great. We'd love to capture some of your input. What brought you here today?
And if that's not something you can do, then please raise your hand and we'll call on you.
And just to add one other item, from the Diversity Issues Task Force, this is the first time this topic has come up through this task force. So, for those who are here through that task force, we'd be particularly eager to hear, what brings you to this conversation.
Bill McLeod's here. I can say something. I was born in Pilsen, grew up on the south side, and there's no question that certain areas were giving, in many cases, less than desirable developments. And I think it had a lot to do with the income level, the economics. I mean, many of these areas had different ethnicities than they do now, but they're still getting it. So I think it's more basically income based rather than a particular ethnicity. Probably get in trouble for saying that, but I think that's the way I look at it. I think it's more economic than maybe essentially based on ethnicity, because a lot of this stuff went on in the major cities and other areas when there were different ethnic people there. So it's just a problem. Why does certain areas get stuck with everything? My wife grew up in Butte, Montana, mining town. They have the Big Pit, which is
My meeting finishes at 3.
at one time was the biggest Superfund site in the United States of America. And, it was mainly an Irish town. I think I'll stop because I'm probably getting in all kinds of trouble here, but that's my view on it.
I want to assure everyone that this is a safe space to speak candidly. We will not succeed. We will not advance. We will not incrementally approve addressing environmental justice unless we're all frank with each other. So by all means, feel free. And if you'd rather have a conversation offline, then I'm available. I'll put my cell phone in the chat, and it's only $4 a minute to call. So that'll be good revenue for the city. So
Raise it to 5, Kevin.
yeah.
Do we have a hand raised? Melissa, did you raise your hand? Melissa Holting. And if not,
I think I also saw Tessa Murray had a
oh,
hand
Tessa,
raised.
you're right. Go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So I was just going to provide an example because I see someone in the chat was saying, I would like to understand more what environmental justice could mean for their village. And just something that we've done in Northbrook. Northbrook obviously is not an environmental justice community by the EPA's definition, but like any place, we still have different pockets of our municipality that there's some areas that are more low income than others. And one way we've been trying to address environmental justice in that way is we have done a tree canopy assessment, and it really clearly showed that the areas with more low-income residents, more people of color, or also the areas in our village that have less of a tree canopy coverage. So moving forward, when we do our tree giveaways, we have actually prioritized those areas in the village that have less of a tree canopy coverage. And those residents who are interested in getting a new tree in their yard, they have first come, first serve in terms of what species they want, how many trees they would like to plant. That's all just something that we like to sort of do as our little example of how we can start thinking about equity in terms of our climate action planning.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing.
I think we should move on to number 2.
Okay.
Keep responding with all of your thoughts about why you're here. We love those responses. But if you can talk about what EJ means in your own community, some of you are already doing that, but if you haven't, give us a response on that. Particularly, I mean, we've got some communities that are affected and some communities that are concerned. So we're really interested in your views across in both kinds of communities, all kinds of communities.
I'd like to just jump in, if I may. The presenters today were excellent. Gives me a little better understanding of the definition of environmental justice. It is an equity component, and to look at that and have an understanding of that for the region, I think is a real positive thing. Let's, future dollars and where we invest those and the priorities on those, I think are important, especially if it comes from municipalities or the area for Northeast Illinois. And so I really appreciate this outreach. I'm still trying to get myself grounded in the understanding. Today was very helpful. And I think basically Mayor Burns spoke to that. We need to hear from you and try, to break out and understand how we can participate together, given the resources that are already available, to try to make sense of that for our priorities in the Chicagoland area. So, Bill, I know you spoke earlier about that. We're getting there to the end of the hour, if I'm reading my correct clock here. But any final thoughts from either mayor?
Yeah, I think we need to, McLeod, I think we need to, this is a great discussion because we're discussing issues that are uncomfortable. And everybody may have a different take on them, but it's just very unfair that certain neighborhoods have so many more of these quote unquote undesirable projects thrust into them because, well, they have a lot of them already. And I'm not looking to get them in Hoffman Estates, trust me. But, there's got to be some way of addressing this so these people are not the only ones dealing with this, because we're all creating the need for these businesses that do stuff you may not necessarily want in your own town. So how do we address that? I don't know. The land costs are different in other areas. I don't know how you do a recycling plant in Barrington Hills. I don't know. I don't know the answer, but I think this is it's a good topic to think about and figure out how we make it more equitable for everybody.
Mayor, you perfectly transitioned to question number 3. How do we address this as a region?
If I knew, I would want everybody to know.
Enough to admit, I
Just
don't know.
try to figure out.
Right.
Well, with that,
Chris Murphy just put something nice in the chat that CJA and IJA will require disadvantaged communities business contracts. Is that right? There's lots of pathways. My question, again, humbly, is, do we have the courage, the strength, the leverage, to borrow a phrase from earlier presentations, to actually choose one of those pathways that work?
Well, we have some great comments in here. Kyle, I don't know if you can capture all those.
We are recording the mayor.
Oh, good. Okay, so I see these, and I'm encouraged by those of us that are jumping into this. And I think any final thoughts by anyone? I would before we close the meeting.
Mayor, I have a thought I'd like to bring up, and I want to ask my colleagues at the Mayor's Caucus staff if I'm on target here. I believe my understanding from Edith and others, Katie, is that there are environmental justice resources both in the bill currently under consideration in Congress and last year's infrastructure bill, which did pass, and we are interested to know, if communities are interested in, through the caucus, pursuing those at the regional level or for the behalf of the region. And I kind of want to pause for Edith to see if I've captured that correctly.
That's correct. I think that, I'm most concerned that the opportunities don't miss eligible communities, and that I feel like we need more capacity and support to really identify, network, and provide the resources to communities even to access the resources, because they don't just show up at your door and say, here you go. I mean, you still have to apply for grants. You have to be in part of the discussion. And in the development of the CEJA, we advocated heartily to make sure that municipalities could be eligible for grants and programs whenever possible. Now, I think we need to make sure that those communities that are defined as environmental justice know they are, and that we're coordinated so that, environmental justice communities, whatever your issues are, get you in line for resources. You're right on that, Kyle.
Can I add, if I may? At times, like a lot of issues when you're talking about environmental justice, it costs money, right? So one thing that we have been thinking about is how can we integrate, how can communities and municipalities integrate businesses and industry which are in their region? How can they help create a better community, a better neighborhood? For example, let's say, I suspect, and I might be wrong, there are Walmarts everywhere. Every community or neighborhood, every city municipality has Walmarts. So how can community, municipality leadership interact with that kind of corporations? Say, okay, why don't you invest in rooftop mitigation technologies like green roofs? It's very ineffective and inappropriate for underserved communities to invest in those, or municipalities to make large investments themselves, but those industries and big corporations can pick higher bugs EJ solutions. And while the communities themselves can look for very low cost minimum solutions, and that way they can have a very healthy ecosystem where that industry or business is really intertwined in the community, and that's a win-win for all. So something along those lines could be a pathway for municipality leaderships to look at solutions where they leverage industry and businesses that are locally present there. And maybe those who want to come into the region, okay, this is something that we want in return from you.
Very good. Our next diversity issue task force meeting is November 8th at 1:30 to 3. The next environmental committee meeting, August 16th, 10 to 11:30. Green infrastructure for equitable climate mitigation and adaptation. Please register in advance. Zoom link for the meeting to put in chat. I want to close by thanking Katie for her exceptional work. Your outreach and your depth of knowledge and taking this to a whole nother level, especially with the associated grants that were popping in. And I know I'm going to close out and let you have the last word. Mayor Burns, you can nod if that's okay with you.
Oh, absolutely. I do whatever you say.
Katie, you have the last word as we depart.
Oh, thank you. I was not expecting this. I just want to say I'm incredibly grateful for the opportunity to work with everybody here. You've all, like, over the past 4 years, really inspired me, and this is directly related to what I want to do in grad school. As I mentioned earlier, I started out in the environment program, and my position has evolved to focus more on equity. So the intersection between environmental work and equity, diversity, and inclusion is really close to my heart. So it was really special that I got to have my last meeting with the caucus be on this topic in particular. And I hope to keep in touch with everybody to see what great work you continue to do. So thank you.
That's good, Katie. You've done a great job of focusing everybody, making us deal with uncomfortable topics like the one today, but they got to be dealt with.
Thank you. Well, it's definitely a privilege to work with you all. So, and thank you so much for coming to our meeting today. We had a great turnout.
You know, we got you a gift, Katie. It's we're going to upgrade your flight to first class. So that's courtesy of St. Charles and Batavia. Couldn't make the meeting today, but thank you all. So,
Amazing.
thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.